There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from not knowing what is coming next. Not physical exhaustion, not even the tiredness of hard work. Something quieter than that, heavier than that. The exhaustion of living with too many unanswered questions, of trying to stay calm while your future feels foggy, your direction feels unstable, and the ground beneath your mind never seems to stop shifting. You wake up, you continue, you handle what you can, but underneath it all there is tension, a low, constant strain, because uncertainty does not always arrive like a crisis. Sometimes it arrives like a life you cannot settle inside. And that is where many people begin to lose themselves. Not because they are weak, not because they are incapable, but because the human mind, when it has no structure, tends to turn uncertainty into threat. It fills gaps with fear. It mistakes ambiguity for disaster. It tries to control what cannot yet be controlled, and in doing so, loses control of what matters most, its own stability. That is the deeper problem. Most people think uncertainty is what breaks them, but uncertainty is only the environment. What truly destabilizes them is the relationship they have with the unknown. It is the way their mind reacts when there is no guarantee, no clear timeline, no secure outcome to hold on to. They do not just face uncertainty, they begin to mentally live inside worst-case scenarios, unfinished futures, imagined losses, and emotional predictions that feel real long before anything has actually happened. And after a while, they call that anxiety their personality. But mental stability is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the ability to remain inwardly ordered while certainty is absent. That is a very different kind of strength. It means learning how to hold tension without becoming consumed by it. How to stay present when your mind wants to run ahead. How to stand in an unclear season of life without letting confusion become identity. Stable people are not people with perfect answers. They are people who have built an inner way of standing that does not collapse every time life refuses to explain itself. A calm mind is not built by certainty. It is built by steadiness. The unknown becomes dangerous when your mind refuses to stay where your life actually is. Your stability begins the moment you stop demanding guarantees before giving yourself peace. This is not about pretending everything will be fine. It is about learning how not to fall apart before the truth even arrives. Because when everything around you feels uncertain, the most important question is not whether life will become predictable again. It is whether you can build a mind that remains clear, grounded, and self-led, even while the future is still unfolding. And that may be one of the most important forms of strength a person can ever develop. Most people think uncertainty is painful because of what might happen later. That is true, but incomplete. Uncertainty does not only trouble the future, it enters the present and begins altering the mind that has to live through the future before the future even arrives. That is why uncertainty can feel so destabilizing. The problem is not only that you do not know what is coming, it is that not knowing starts changing how you think, how you feel, how you interpret, and how safe you feel inside your own mind. A situation remains unresolved on the outside, but the real disturbance begins when the unresolved thing starts reorganizing your inner world from the inside. That is the part many people struggle to explain. They say they are stressed, but it is more than stress. They say they are worried, but it is more than worry. What they are often feeling is the psychological effect of being unable to settle internally while life refuses to settle externally. The mind begins searching for ground, but the ground keeps moving. It starts reaching for closure, prediction, reassurance, or control, and when none of those arrive cleanly, the whole internal system becomes easier to agitate. This is why uncertainty is not simply an external condition. It becomes an internal environment. A person waiting for news Living through instability, facing unclear outcomes, or carrying unanswered questions may look outwardly functional. He may still go to work, answer messages, handle responsibilities, and continue the visible rhythm of life. But inwardly, something else is happening. His thinking gets faster. His emotional baseline becomes more alert. His imagination becomes more active. His mind starts scanning for signals, clues, shifts, meanings. He is not just living through uncertainty. He is being mentally reshaped by it. That reshaping matters, because once uncertainty begins entering the mind this way, it no longer remains a neutral absence of answers. It becomes an active force. It starts influencing mood, narrowing perspective, making ordinary moments feel less stable than they are. Small things gain extra weight. Silence becomes harder to tolerate. Delay becomes harder to interpret calmly. The person becomes less troubled only by the unknown itself, and more troubled by what the unknown is doing to his mental state. This is where many people become unfair to themselves. They assume their instability means they are weak, dramatic, or incapable of handling life with maturity. But often the more honest truth is that uncertainty has started disrupting their inner sense of safety. The mind does not only want information, it wants footing. And when footing is missing for too long, the person may begin losing steadiness not because he is broken, but because he is trying to stay internally organized while reality remains externally unresolved. That is an exhausting task, and it is also the right place to begin. Because once you understand that uncertainty is not only disturbing what may happen, but also disturbing the mind that must live through not knowing, your struggle becomes more understandable, more precise, and more possible to work with. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from living without mental footing. Not because something terrible has already happened, but because nothing has settled enough for the mind to stop preparing for what might. That is the inner texture of uncertainty. It does not always arrive as one dramatic fear. More often, it arrives as a constant low-grade disturbance, a restless background tension, a feeling that the mind is never fully allowed to sit down. Even when nothing urgent is happening in the exact moment, something inside remains slightly on alert, slightly unfinished, slightly unable to relax into ordinary life. This is why uncertainty can feel so psychologically loud. The mind starts scanning. It looks for clues, patterns, changes in tone, signs of danger, hidden meaning in ordinary delays, extra weight in ordinary silence. A message takes too long. A result has not come back. A conversation feels unresolved. A plan remains unclear. And because there is no solid answer to anchor interpretation, the mind begins doing more work than reality has actually asked it to do. It fills in blanks. It rehearses possibilities. It keeps checking the emotional weather of the situation, as if one more scan might finally produce certainty. That scanning creates a very specific internal life. Thought becomes faster. Attention becomes less stable. Inner space becomes narrower. The person is still outwardly functioning, but inwardly he feels more crowded than usual. His mind does not rest inside the present very well because part of it keeps leaning toward what has not been resolved. He may be eating, working, talking, walking, but in the background something remains active. The unknown has not stayed in one corner of life. It has spread into the whole atmosphere of the mind. That is why uncertainty often feels less like one problem and more like a change in mental climate. The person becomes easier to startle internally, easier to rush, easier to darken the future, easier to interpret neutral things through a more fragile lens. He may notice that his patience is thinner, his emotional threshold lower, his ability to enjoy simple moments weaker. Even calm moments can feel incomplete because the mind keeps holding open a psychological file that has not been closed. It is not only thinking about the uncertainty, it is living in relationship to it all day. And with that comes a particular kind of inner contradiction. Part of the person knows he is overthinking. He knows not every silence means danger. He knows not every delay contains a hidden message. He knows not every possibility deserves equal emotional weight. But knowing that intellectually is not always enough to calm the system once uncertainty has already entered the body and imagination. That is what makes the experience so frustrating. The person is not merely irrational. He is internally overengaged with what cannot yet be settled. This is the texture that has to be recognized. Not just fear, not just stress, but inner crowding, mental overalertness, compulsive meaning-making, a shrinking ability to feel fully at home in the present while the future remains unclear. Once you can name that texture honestly, something important begins to shift. You are no longer only living inside the disturbance. You are beginning to see the shape of it. A single uncertain moment can be uncomfortable. Repeated uncertainty begins changing how you experience yourself. That is where the real damage often becomes deeper than people first realize. Because uncertainty does not only disturb your mood, it teaches your mind what to expect from itself when life refuses to become clear. And if the pattern keeps repeating, restlessness, scanning, overthinking, emotional instability, compulsive meaning-making, loss of inner footing, then something quiet begins forming beneath all of it. A new expectation, a new internal prediction. The mind starts assuming that when life becomes unclear, you will likely become mentally unsteady inside it. That assumption is costly, not only because it makes uncertain moments harder, but because it weakens self-trust before the next uncertain moment even arrives. This is how repeated uncertainty changes a person. He may still be intelligent, still capable, still thoughtful, still outwardly functional, but somewhere inside, his confidence in his own steadiness begins thinning out. He no longer enters unclear seasons with the same inner neutrality. He carries memory into them. He remembers previous spirals, previous nights of mental replay, previous days where unanswered questions took over far more of his mind than he wanted them to. So before the next situation even fully unfolds, part of him is already bracing against himself. That is a painful way to live, because now the problem is no longer only the uncertainty in front of you. It is also the uncertainty of what your own mind may become inside uncertainty. You do not simply wonder what will happen. You wonder what will happen to you while you are waiting for what will happen. And once that pattern becomes familiar enough, it starts reshaping identity. A person begins saying things like, "I'm just not good with uncertainty. I always lose myself when things are unclear. I can handle life until too much is left unresolved. I become mentally unstable when I don't know where things are going." Notice what is happening there. The reaction is no longer being treated as a pattern. It is being absorbed as a self-definition. That shift matters because identity has weight. Once the mind starts believing that instability is part of who you are whenever life becomes uncertain, the unknown gains power before it even arrives. Ambiguity no longer meets a neutral system. It meets a system already primed for doubt, already expecting overreaction, already suspicious of its own ability to stay clear, contained, and emotionally steady without answers. This is how self-trust erodes, not only through big breakdowns, through repeated internal evidence. The mind is always learning from what you repeatedly do in hard conditions. If uncertainty regularly makes you lose proportion, it learns that proportion is fragile. If uncertainty regularly makes you compulsively scan for signs and meanings, it learns that the unknown is not survivable without mental overengagement. If uncertainty regularly pulls you away from the present and into emotionally loaded prediction, it learns that not knowing has the right to reorganize you. That is why this issue cannot be reduced to anxiety alone. It becomes a relationship problem between you and your own mind. You begin to feel less safe inside yourself. less confident that you can hold form without closure, less trusting of your own interpretation when clarity is missing, less certain that you can remain mentally usable while life is still unresolved. And that loss does not stay confined to obviously stressful moments. It follows you into ordinary life. It can make you more anticipatory, more mentally guarded, more emotionally dependent on quick reassurance. You begin preparing not only for uncertain situations, but for your own possible destabilization inside them. That kind of inner caution drains life. It makes the mind feel like a place that can be pulled off center too easily. It keeps a person outwardly functioning while inwardly unconvinced. This is why repeated uncertainty responses matter so much. They do not only shape moments, they shape expectations, and expectations shape identity. The good news is that this process, while painful, is not final. The same mind that learned instability through repeated evidence can learn steadiness through repeated evidence too. But that begins with seeing the stakes clearly, not with shame, not with exaggeration, with honesty. If uncertainty keeps making you lose trust in yourself, then the task is no longer only to reduce overthinking. The task is to rebuild a mind whose presence you can trust, even while life is still refusing to give you answers. One of the hidden reasons uncertainty feels so mentally destabilizing is that the mind is far less comfortable with unfinished things than most people realize. It does not only dislike pain, it dislikes open loops, an unanswered question, an unresolved conversation, an unclear outcome, a delayed decision, a future that refuses to announce itself. These things create a particular kind of psychological pressure because the mind is built to seek sequence, meaning, and closure. It wants to know where things are going. It wants to understand what something means. It wants enough certainty to organize emotion, expectation, and action around a coherent picture. When that picture does not arrive, the mind does not stay neutral for long. It starts straining. That straining is important to understand, because many people assume they are unstable simply because they are too emotional, too sensitive, or too mentally weak. But often something more specific is happening. Their mind is reacting to the discomfort of an open loop. It is trying to close what reality has not yet closed. It is trying to resolve inwardly what remains unresolved outwardly. And when it cannot do that cleanly, tension grows. This is why uncertainty so often produces overthinking. Not because the person is stupid, not because the person enjoys suffering, because the mind is trying to complete something. It keeps circling the unanswered thing in the hope that one more thought, one more interpretation, one more scan of the situation might finally reduce the discomfort of not knowing. But instead of producing peace, this usually creates more internal pressure. The loop remains open, yet the person has now added more mental activity, more emotional investment, and more imagined meaning around it. That is where instability begins growing. The open loop does not stay external. It becomes internal agitation. Think of someone waiting for a test result, a reply, a decision, clarity in a relationship, financial direction, or news about a future that matters deeply. Often what exhausts the person is not only the possible outcome, it is the unfinishedness itself. The mind keeps returning to it because it hates the feeling of suspended meaning. It wants to settle. It wants to arrive. It wants to stop carrying the discomfort of incompletion. So it starts reaching for premature relief through mental repetition, prediction, emotional rehearsal, or compulsive checking. But that relief rarely lasts. Because the deeper issue is not that the mind needs more thought. It is that the mind does not yet know how to remain stable inside an open loop. That is a very different diagnosis. And it matters because once you see it, you stop asking only, "Why am I thinking about this so much?" and start asking something sharper. What unresolved loop am I trying to close internally before life has actually closed it? That question brings honesty into the room. It helps you see that much of your mental pressure may not be coming from the fact itself, but from the mind's inability to tolerate incompletion without turning it into a full-time internal project. This is one of the first real insights in mental stability. The unknown is hard, but the mind's hunger to force closure can make the unknown much harder than it already is. And until that hunger is understood, uncertainty will keep gaining extra power, not because every open loop is catastrophic, but because the mind keeps treating open loops as if they must be solved inwardly before peace is possible. The mind does something dangerous when it cannot tolerate uncertainty for very long. It starts manufacturing certainty. Not real certainty. Emotional certainty. A story that feels solid enough to stand on, even if it was built from fear, assumption, and incomplete information. This is one of the deepest reasons uncertainty becomes so psychologically painful. The mind does not simply sit with the unknown and wait calmly for reality to speak. Very often, it rushes to fill the empty space itself. It starts creating explanations, predicting outcomes, assigning meaning, building conclusions. And because these conclusions temporarily reduce the discomfort of not knowing, the mind begins treating them as relief. But relief and truth are not the same thing. That distinction matters enormously, because many people think they are reacting to reality when they are actually reacting to a fear-made version of reality that their mind created in order to escape the tension of the unknown. They say, "I just know this is going badly. I can already tell what this means. Something feels off, so I know where this is heading." In those moments, they are not actually standing on evidence. They are standing on a constructed answer that feels emotionally satisfying because it ends the suspense for a moment. Even if the answer is dark, even if the answer is painful, even if the answer is self-defeating, the mind often prefers a painful certainty to an open uncertainty, because at least a painful certainty feels like ground. This is why people under uncertainty so often begin forecasting disaster before reality has confirmed anything. The unknown feels intolerable, so the mind races ahead and says, "Here, this must be the answer. This silence must mean rejection. This delay must mean failure. This distance must mean loss. This unclear signal must mean something bad is forming behind the scenes." The specific content changes, but the psychological movement stays the same. The mind is trying to escape the unknown by inventing a conclusion strong enough to stop the tension of waiting. That invented answer can feel incredibly convincing, because once emotion attaches to a story, the story starts sounding like insight. Fear gives it urgency. Restlessness gives it momentum. Repetition gives it familiarity. And familiarity often gets mistaken for truth. This is why people can become deeply disturbed by possibilities that are not facts, by interpretations that have not been tested, by futures that have not arrived. The suffering becomes real even when the certainty beneath it is not. The mind is no longer only living with ambiguity. It is living with a narrative it created to defend itself from ambiguity. That is a crucial psychological shift to understand. Because once you see it, you realize that many of your most destabilizing thoughts under uncertainty are not actually answers. They are escapes. They feel like clarity, but they are often avoidance in a more intelligent disguise. They allow the mind to say, "At least now I know," even when what it knows is only fear arranged into a believable shape. Imagine someone waiting for an important response. The message has not come. The outcome is unknown. Nothing concrete has happened yet, but inside the mind begins building. "They are ignoring me. This is going badly. I can feel it. I already know what this means." By the time the actual answer arrives, the person may have already lived through 10 emotional versions of the future, all because the unknown felt too open to tolerate cleanly. Or think of someone facing financial uncertainty, relationship ambiguity, health questions, or career instability. Instead of holding the unclear reality as unclear, the mind starts forcing closure through imagined outcomes. It does this because unresolvedness creates tension, and the mind wants relief. But the relief it chooses is often counterfeit. It replaces ambiguity with assumption, and then suffers the assumption as if it were confirmed. This is one of the great hidden engines of mental instability. The unknown hurts. The mind rushes to invent answers. Those answers create emotional reality. And then the person becomes destabilized not only by life, but by the premature certainty his own mind produced in response to life. That is why interpretive discipline matters so much here. You must learn to notice when your mind is no longer waiting for reality, but trying to outrun it. You must learn to ask, do I know this? Or do I need this to be true so I can stop feeling the tension of not knowing? That is a hard question, but it is a freeing one, because it helps you see that many of your conclusions under uncertainty are not acts of wisdom. They are acts of emotional self-protection. The mind would rather land on an answer than remain suspended in an unanswered state. And until you understand that impulse, you will keep mistaking fear-made certainty for real psychological clarity. This does not mean all instincts are false. It does not mean caution is wrong. It does not mean every concern is invented. It means that under uncertainty, the mind becomes highly tempted to convert possibility into certainty before reality has earned that conversion. And when that happens, suffering expands. The person is no longer just carrying the difficulty of what is unresolved. He is carrying a conclusion too, often a dark one, often a premature one, often one that has the emotional force of truth without the evidential strength of truth. This is why mental stability requires more than calming down. It requires honesty about the stories the mind creates to escape open space. Strong minds still feel the discomfort of not knowing. They do not enjoy unresolvedness more than everyone else, but they become slower to turn discomfort into conclusion. They learn to leave more things unfinalized for longer. They learn that uncertainty is already hard enough without adding false certainty to it. They become more willing to say, I do not know yet, even when part of them is desperate to end the tension by imagining an answer. That willingness is a form of strength, because sometimes the mind does not become unstable from the unknown alone. It becomes unstable from the stories it creates to avoid the unknown. And once you understand that, you begin seeing one of the most important truths in this whole journey. A mind that cannot tolerate uncertainty will often try to escape it by inventing answers. But invented answers do not create real stability. They only create temporary emotional ground that collapses the moment reality says otherwise. Uncertainty becomes far more dangerous when the mind has nothing stable inside it to return to. That is one of the quiet truths beneath mental instability. Many people assume the problem is simply that life is unclear, but uncertainty alone does not explain why one person becomes mentally scattered while another, though still affected, remains more intact. The difference is often not that one life is easy and the other is hard. The difference is that one mind has inner anchors and the other gets pulled by every possibility that passes through it. That image matters, because possibility is powerful when the future is open. One possible failure, one possible rejection, one possible loss, one possible mistake, one possible hidden meaning behind a silence, a delay, a change in tone, or a situation that has not yet declared itself. If the mind has no inner anchor, each new possibility enters with too much force. It does not arrive as one option among many. It arrives like a wave. It pulls attention, interpretation, mood, and nervous system response in its direction. Then another possibility appears and pulls the mind somewhere else. Then another. Soon the person is no longer living in reality as it is. he is being moved around by every version of reality that could be. That is exhausting, and it is one of the clearest signs that the problem is no longer only uncertainty. It is the absence of internal steadiness in the presence of uncertainty. An inner anchor is not a guaranteed answer. It is not control over the future. It is not a magical way to remove discomfort. It is something steadier than that. An inner anchor is a stable point the mind can return to when outer clarity is missing. A rule, a standard, a grounded interpretation, a deliberate posture, a chosen way of standing inside the unknown that does not change every time emotion rises or possibility darkens. Without that kind of structure, the mind keeps borrowing its direction from whatever thought or fear is loudest in the moment. That is why it becomes so easy to destabilize. Imagine a person waiting for important news. If he has no inner anchor, each hour feels different because each thought feels different. In the morning, he imagines the best. By midday, a delay feels ominous. By evening, silence becomes a message. The mind does not stay in one relationship to reality because nothing inside it is settled enough to hold form while reality remains unsettled. He becomes psychologically weather-driven. His whole internal state begins moving with each mental forecast. This is what happens when the mind lacks anchors. It gets pulled outward too easily. It becomes over-responsive to possibility, over-impressed by fear, over-persuaded by internal shifts in tone. It does not know how to hold the unknown without borrowing certainty from every new story that passes through it. That is why people in uncertainty often feel mentally exhausted even when nothing has happened. Too much has happened internally. Too many possibilities have been granted too much authority. An anchored mind behaves differently. Not because it enjoys uncertainty, not because it knows more, but because it has a place to stand that is not entirely dependent on external resolution. It can say, "I do not know yet, but I do not need to follow every possibility to the end of the road." It can say, "This fear is one possibility, not the whole truth." It can say, "This moment is unresolved, but I do not need to let unresolvedness turn me into someone mentally scattered and emotionally pulled apart." That is what inner anchoring does. It limits the power of possibility, not by denying possibility exists, but by refusing to let every possibility become a command. This is deeply important because an unanchored mind treats uncertainty like an open field where any thought can become law. A darker thought arrives, and it gets believed. A frightening possibility appears, and it gets emotionally rehearsed. A temporary feeling rises, and it starts governing the day. Without anchors, the mind becomes too available to internal suggestion. It keeps handing over its structure to whatever interpretation is most emotionally charged. That is the real danger. Not simply that life is unresolved, but that the unresolved life begins deciding too much inside the mind. So when we talk about mental stability, we are not really talking about becoming certain before certainty exists. We are talking about becoming anchored enough that uncertainty does not own the whole system. That means building inner rules like these. Not every possibility deserves equal emotional investment. Not every fear deserves immediate obedience. Not every unknown must be solved mentally before I can remain steady. Not every unresolved situation gives my mind permission to drift into instability. These are not just comforting ideas. They are stabilizing structures. They give the mind somewhere to return when possibility starts multiplying faster than reality. And that is what many people are actually missing. Not more information, not more prediction, not more mental effort. They are missing a steadier place inside themselves from which to face a future that has not yet become clear. A mind without inner anchors gets pulled by every possibility because every possibility feels like it might be the answer. But a steadier mind learns something more mature. I do not need to be pulled by everything that could happen in order to remain present with what is happening now. That is the beginning of real stability. Not when the future becomes known. When the mind becomes less available to every possible version of the future, while the future is still unknown. Most people think they will become mentally stable once life finally becomes clear. Once the answer comes. Once the outcome is known. Once the uncertainty ends. Once the waiting is over. That is the fantasy many minds live inside without ever saying it directly. They believe stability is something that will arrive after resolution, after the message, after the diagnosis, after the conversation, after the decision, after the money comes through, after the relationship declares itself, after the future stops feeling so unfinished. And because of that belief, they keep postponing steadiness. They treat mental stability like a reward the mind earns only after life stops being uncertain. But that is not real stability. That is dependence on certainty. And dependence on certainty will always make the mind more fragile than it needs to be. Because life does not always resolve quickly. Sometimes the answer is late. Sometimes the path is unclear for longer than you wanted. Sometimes you do not get closure when you think you should. Sometimes the future remains open while the mind keeps begging for ground. If your inner steadiness depends entirely on external clarity, then you will keep becoming psychologically vulnerable every time life refuses to explain itself on your preferred timeline. This is why stability has to be understood differently. Stability is not knowing. It is holding form without knowing. That distinction changes everything. Because once you understand it, the goal is no longer to remove every unknown before you can function well. The goal becomes protecting your inner structure while the unknown still exists. You stop asking, how do I finally get certainty so I can calm down? And begin asking something more mature. How do I remain mentally organized while certainty is still unavailable? That is a very different kind of strength. And it is the kind that actually matters in real life. A stable mind does not need all questions answered before it can remain a place with order. It may still feel discomfort. It may still wish the answer would come. It may still have moments of fear, impatience, or emotional restlessness. But it does not let not knowing automatically dissolve its structure. It does not treat uncertainty as permission for chaos. It does not conclude that because the future is unresolved, the mind must also become unresolved in every direction. That is the refrain. Not knowing is not the same as losing form. Uncertainty in life does not require uncertainty in your relationship to yourself. Think about how many people unconsciously merge those two things. Life becomes unclear, so their thinking becomes unclear. The future stays open, so their emotions start ruling interpretation. Answers are delayed, so the mind begins drifting into endless projection, scanning, and internal instability. In other words, the uncertainty outside becomes uncertainty inside. And once that happens, the person is no longer only carrying an unresolved life. He is carrying an unresolved mind. That is what makes uncertainty so exhausting. Not only that reality is unfinished, but that the self starts imitating the unfinishedness of reality. A more stable mind behaves differently. It understands that while the outcome may still be unknown, not everything needs to become unknown at once. Your standards do not need to become unknown. Your posture does not need to become unknown. Your commitment to proportion does not need to become unknown. Your ability to slow interpretation, contain emotion, and return to grounded behavior does not need to vanish just because life has not produced answers yet. This is where real mental steadiness begins. Not when uncertainty disappears. When you stop making certainty a requirement for self-command. That does not mean uncertainty becomes pleasant. It means it stops having total authority over your inner condition. Imagine someone waiting for life to clarify itself. An uncertain relationship, a career crossroads, a health concern, a financial decision, a major answer that matters deeply. A fragile mind says, I cannot settle until this settles. A more stable mind says, this unsettles me, but I do not need to become fully unsettled with it. The outer circumstance may be the same. The inner stance is radically different. That difference is psychological maturity. Because maturity is not only the ability to enjoy life when things are clear, it is the ability to remain in relationship with your deeper structure when clarity is missing. It is the refusal to let life's unfinished chapters make your whole inner world unfinished too. It is the understanding that peace is not always available, but form still can be. That word matters again. Form. A stable mind under uncertainty keeps enough form that reality does not become a total internal flood. It keeps some hierarchy, some packing, some interpretive discipline, some emotional containment, some memory that not knowing is a condition, not an identity. It may still be affected, but it is not fully reorganized by the fact that answers are missing. This is why stability is far more active than people think. It is not passive calm. It is disciplined holding. Holding interpretation before it runs dark. Holding behavior before it becomes reactive. Holding emotional experience without becoming made of it. Holding inner order before life gives you the relief you would prefer. That is what makes stability real. Because if your mind can only remain usable after uncertainty ends, then it has not actually learned how to live. It has only learned how to recover after life cooperates. But life does not always cooperate. Sometimes it leaves you in the middle, in the waiting, in the unclear stretch, in the space where answers are still forming. And if you want a steadier life, your mind has to become capable of existing there without turning that space into a private collapse. This is also why so many people feel chronically tired under uncertainty. They are not only carrying the unknown, they are carrying the constant demand that the unknown must end before they can become themselves again. That demand creates pressure. It makes every unresolved day feel like a psychological delay of life itself. But once you stop requiring immediate knowing as the price of inner stability, something softens. Not because certainty has arrived, but because you are no longer making certainty the only doorway to steadiness. That is a powerful shift. It means the mind can begin saying, I do not know yet, and I still know how I want to stand. That sentence contains real freedom. Not freedom from uncertainty. Freedom from becoming completely governed by it. And that is why this reframe matters so much. Stability is not a state reserved for clear seasons. It is not the emotional prize at the end of uncertainty. It is a relationship to yourself while the answer is still absent. A way of holding shape in the middle of open space. A refusal to let not knowing become total internal disorganization. So the next time your mind tells you that you will finally be okay once everything becomes clear, notice the hidden assumption underneath it. Notice how it keeps teaching you to wait for life to stabilize before you give stability to yourself. And then remember the deeper truth. You do not need full answers before you can remain informed. You do not need closure before you can hold structure. You do not need certainty before you can stay mentally steady. Because real stability is not knowing. It is learning how to stay a place with order even while life remains unresolved. One of the most important differences between a stable mind and an unstable one is not that one feels less. It is that one interprets more carefully before emotion takes full control. That distinction matters because uncertainty does not usually destroy a person in one clean movement. It enters through interpretation. Something is unclear, unresolved, delayed, or open-ended, and before the facts have fully formed, the mind begins assigning meaning. It asks what this means, where this is going, what danger may be hiding here, what outcome should now be expected. If that process is not protected, emotion rushes in and starts doing the interpreting for you. And once emotion starts interpreting uncertainty, stability weakens quickly. Because fear is not a neutral storyteller. Restlessness is not a wise analyst. Urgency is not a careful reader of reality. These states can be real, intense, and understandable, but when they become the main lens through which uncertainty is understood, the mind starts building conclusions too fast. A delay becomes rejection. A silence becomes proof. A lack of clarity becomes a sign that something is wrong. A possibility becomes a prediction. The person is no longer living with uncertainty itself. He is living with what his fear has already decided uncertainty must mean. That is how emotion takes over interpretation. Not by announcing itself dramatically, by quietly becoming the narrator. This is why mental stability depends so heavily on protecting interpretation early. A stable mind knows that uncertainty will produce feeling. It expects unease, impatience, tension, maybe even fear. But it does not immediately let those states decide what the situation means. It keeps a small but crucial distance. Enough distance to ask, what do I actually know? What is fact and what is projection? What is happening and what is my nervous system adding to what is happening? Those questions are not small. They are structural. They protect the mind from turning the unknown into an emotional script before reality has even fully spoken. Imagine someone waiting for an important answer. Hours pass, then more hours, then a day. The unstable mind starts filling the silence. This is a bad sign. If it were good news, I would know by now. Something has shifted. Something is wrong. The person begins reacting not to confirmed reality, but to a fear-shaped interpretation of silence. Emotion has entered the meaning-making process and taken over. But a more stable mind approaches the same situation differently. It still feels the tension. It still dislikes the waiting, but it slows interpretation. It says, silence is difficult, but silence is not yet a conclusion. Delay is uncomfortable, but discomfort is not evidence. I can feel the pull to decide what this means before I actually know. That is interpretive discipline. And interpretive discipline is one of the deepest forms of mental stability. Because once interpretation is lost, everything downstream becomes harder. Emotion rises further. Behavior becomes more reactive. The future looks darker. The mind starts preparing for things that may never happen. The person feels more exhausted, not only because life is uncertain, but because his interpretation has turned uncertainty into an internal emergency before reality has asked for that level of response. This is why stable minds do not wait until emotion fully takes over and then try to recover. They protect meaning earlier. They understand that what the mind says about uncertainty matters almost as much as uncertainty itself. They know that if interpretation becomes distorted, the whole internal system becomes easier to destabilize. That does not mean a stable mind is cold or detached. It means it refuses to let emotion become the first and final authority on what is true. There is a major difference between feeling fear and allowing fear to decide the meaning of the moment. There is a difference between feeling uneasy and letting unease become prophecy. There is a difference between sensing tension and translating tension into certainty that something bad is unfolding. A stable mind protects those differences, and in doing so, it protects itself. This matters especially for people who are reflective, sensitive, intuitive, and mentally intense. Those people often notice a great deal. They pick up tone, timing, nuance, emotional shifts. But under uncertainty, that strength can become dangerous if it is not disciplined. Sensitivity without interpretive structure easily becomes over-meaning. The person starts reading too much into too little. He begins trusting his emotional impression as if it were confirmed truth. Stability requires that sensitivity be held inside a stronger frame, not denied, not mocked, framed. That frame sounds like this. I can feel this strongly without deciding too quickly. I can notice a possibility without turning it into a conclusion. I can let uncertainty remain uncertainty a little longer. Those lines do not remove discomfort. They prevent discomfort from taking command of interpretation. And that is the point. A stable mind protects interpretation before emotion takes over because it knows something crucial. The first story fear tells is often the least trustworthy one. Fear wants closure. It wants direction. It wants certainty, even if the certainty is painful, because painful certainty can feel easier to hold than open uncertainty. But a stronger mind learns to resist that impulse. It does not rush to close the loop simply because the loop feels uncomfortable. It does not convert possibility into truth just because the unknown is hard to carry. This is not passivity. It is mental steadiness. It is the refusal to hand over the whole field of meaning to whatever state happens to be loudest. Over time, this changes how a person lives with the unknown. He still feels, he still waits, he still gets restless, but he becomes less likely to let his emotions write reality for him before reality has written itself. He becomes less likely to darken the future simply because the present is unresolved. He becomes less likely to turn not knowing into a full internal collapse through the force of interpretation alone. And that is one of the clearest signs of a stable mind. Not that uncertainty never hurts, but that hurt is not allowed to become the author of the whole story. One of the quiet reasons people become mentally unstable under uncertainty is that they do not only want clarity, they want relief, and they want it quickly. That desire is deeply human. When life feels unresolved, the mind naturally reaches for something that will ease the tension. An answer, a sign, a message, a decision, a shift in tone, a reassuring interpretation, some internal or external movement that finally allows the body to unclench and the mind to stop leaning forward into the unknown. There is nothing strange about wanting that. The problem begins when relief becomes a condition for self-command. That is where instability grows. Because uncertainty rarely asks for your preference before it enters your life. It does not wait until you are rested enough, calm enough, or emotionally prepared enough to carry it well. It simply arrives, and when it does, a mind that has made immediate relief its hidden requirement starts suffering twice. First, from the uncertainty itself. Second, from the demand that uncertainty should end quickly before steadiness becomes possible. That second layer is often what breaks people faster than they realize. They are not only unsettled by not knowing, they are mentally fighting the fact that they still do not know. That fight creates a specific kind of fragility. The person keeps asking life to resolve before he can return to himself. He keeps postponing inner order until the external answer arrives. He keeps saying, in effect, I will settle when this settles. And because life does not always settle on demand, his stability keeps getting deferred. He becomes emotionally dependent on relief. He waits for the situation to stop pressing before he gives structure back to his own mind. This is why stability has to become something deeper than emotional comfort. It has to become a posture, a way of standing inside unresolvedness, without turning unresolvedness into internal surrender. That phrase matters. Internal surrender. Because that is often what happens when relief is demanded too strongly. The person does not consciously say, I give up my structure until certainty returns. But his mind behaves that way. It lets the unknown take over interpretation. It lets discomfort take over behavior. It lets restlessness become the atmosphere of the day. It starts living as if not getting quick relief means not being able to remain psychologically organized at all. This is one of the hardest truths about uncertainty. If you insist on immediate relief before you can stay mentally steady, then uncertainty will keep owning more of you than it should. A stable mind understands something more mature. It understands that relief is welcome, but not required for form. It understands that answers may come later, but posture must be chosen now. It understands that emotional comfort is not always available, yet self-command still can be. That does not make uncertainty pleasant. It makes steadiness possible while uncertainty remains unpleasant. Imagine someone waiting on a life-changing answer. He checks his phone constantly. He replays old conversations. He keeps trying to read signs from silence. He cannot settle into work, rest, or ordinary life because part of him keeps saying, "Once I know, then I can breathe." That is not only the pain of uncertainty, that is the mind making relief a gatekeeper. Now compare that with a stronger stance. The same person still wants the answer, still feels the pull, still dislikes the waiting. But somewhere inside, a different rule begins to operate. I do not need the discomfort to end immediately in order to remain in relationship with myself. I do not need relief before I can keep my shape. That is a radically different posture. And it is where real stability begins. Because mental strength under uncertainty is not measured by how quickly you can make yourself feel better. It is measured by whether you can stay intact while feeling unsettled. Whether you can let discomfort exist without converting it into full internal disorder. Whether you can stop making emotional ease the price of psychological order. This is not suppression. It is not gritting your teeth and pretending you do not care. It is not forcing false calm. It is the refusal to let discomfort become authority. That distinction matters because many people confuse maturity with emotional deadness. They think if they are not immediately soothed, then they must either collapse or go numb. But there is a third option. You can feel the ache of uncertainty without kneeling to it. You can carry unresolvedness without becoming internally shapeless. You can want relief deeply and still refuse to make relief the ruler of your mind. That is posture. And posture matters more than preference in difficult seasons. Preference says, "I want this to end now so I can be okay." Posture says, "I want this to end, but until it does, I will not let the waiting turn me into someone mentally scattered, emotionally governed, and interpretively weak." That is strength in a quieter form. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It does not create the instant satisfaction that relief promises. But it builds something much more valuable than instant satisfaction. It builds self-respect inside unresolved time. Because every time you stop demanding immediate relief as the condition for inner steadiness, you teach your mind something important. You teach it that not knowing is hard, but not fatal. You teach it that discomfort can be carried without becoming identity. You teach it that the self does not have to disappear simply because the answer has not arrived yet. Over time, that changes the whole relationship between uncertainty and the mind. The unknown stops feeling like something that automatically suspends your ability to remain yourself. This is why the question must shift. Instead of asking, "How do I get relief as fast as possible?" ask something stronger. How do I keep my form while relief is still unavailable? That question is stabilizing because it returns responsibility to the one place you still have influence. Not the outcome, not the timeline, not the answer. Your posture, your interpretation, your behavior, your willingness to remain with yourself even when the moment refuses to soothe you. This is where many people begin, rebuilding real stability. Not when uncertainty disappears. When they stop treating immediate relief as the entrance fee for mental steadiness. And that is a powerful change. Because life will not always move at the speed your nervous system prefers. Some answers will take longer. Some seasons will stay unresolved. Some futures will remain open while you are still living inside them. If your mind cannot tolerate that without surrendering structure, it will keep becoming a hostage to resolution. But if you learn how to remain informed before relief arrives, then uncertainty loses some of its power to disorganize you. So this section comes down to one essential truth. Stability begins when you stop demanding that the discomfort end before you allow yourself to stay mentally steady. You may still want relief. You may still pray for clarity. You may still feel the ache of not knowing. But you stop making those things prerequisites for self-command. And once that happens, the unknown becomes easier to carry. Not because it feels better, because you no longer collapse every time it refuses to end on time. One of the first things uncertainty does to the mind is not create facts. It creates stories. That is why so many people feel mentally destabilized before anything has actually happened. The event is still unresolved. The answer has not arrived. The outcome is not yet known. And yet inwardly, the mind is already moving at great speed. It is building interpretations, assigning meanings, rehearsing possibilities, and turning open space into an emotional narrative before reality has fully spoken. This is where instability often begins. Not when life becomes uncertain. When the mind starts telling a story about uncertainty, and then begins living inside that story as if it were already true. That distinction matters because the story usually feels intelligent in the moment. It does not announce itself as imagination. It sounds like preparation. It sounds like insight. It sounds like realism. The mind says, I am just thinking ahead. I am just being careful. I am just trying to understand what this means. But under uncertainty, what the mind often calls understanding is actually narrative acceleration. It is moving too quickly from incomplete facts to emotionally loaded conclusions. That speed is dangerous, because a fast story is rarely a clean story. It is usually fear-shaped, urgency-shaped, restlessness-shaped, need for relief-shaped. The mind is not only observing uncertainty, it is trying to escape the discomfort of uncertainty by converting it into a narrative that feels more solid than the open unknown. Even a painful story can feel easier to carry than unresolved space, because at least a story gives the mind something to stand on. But if that story is premature, distorted, or darkened by fear, then the person is no longer suffering only from uncertainty. He is suffering from a version of reality, his own mind built in reaction to uncertainty. This is why one of the first disciplines of mental stability is to slow the story before the story starts running you. That means learning to notice when your mind has shifted from receiving reality to scripting reality. A delayed response becomes a rejection story. A difficult silence becomes a danger story. An unclear future becomes a failure story. A lack of answers becomes a lost story. And once the story hardens, your emotions begin reacting to the narrative as if it were confirmed fact. The body tightens. The mood darkens. The day becomes harder to live. Not because certainty has arrived, but because your mind has started narrating uncertainty with too much speed and too much confidence. Imagine someone waiting for important news. Nothing final has been said yet. The outcome is still open. But by midday, the mind has already built a sequence. This silence must mean something is wrong. If something were good, I would know by now. This is probably heading in a bad direction. I should prepare for disappointment. Now the person is not only waiting, he is emotionally living inside a story he wrote to reduce the discomfort of not knowing. The uncertainty is real. The story may not be. That is the correction this section asks for. Slow down. Not passively. Not carelessly. Deliberately. Ask, what do I actually know? What has truly happened? What part is fact? And what part is the story my mind is building because it hates open space? Those questions restore breathing room. They do not remove uncertainty, but they stop uncertainty from becoming instant internal theater. They interrupt the mind's habit of converting possibility into narrative before reality has earned that conversion. This matters because a story repeated often enough begins to govern the nervous system. It shapes mood. It shapes posture. It shapes how you walk into the next hour of your day. If the story is dark, your whole inner climate becomes darker. If the story is catastrophic, your body starts preparing for catastrophe. If the story is hopeless, your motivation, patience, and emotional regulation begin weakening under the weight of something that may still be untrue. That is why stable minds protect the space between event and story. They still feel the pull to narrate. They still notice the urge to conclude. but they become slower to give those early narratives full authority. They know that the first story uncertainty produces is often not wisdom. It is discomfort trying to escape itself. So the practical standard becomes this: when uncertainty enters, do not rush to narrate it. Let the facts stay smaller than your fear wants them to be. Let the unknown remain unknown a little longer. Let the mind feel the tension without instantly solving that tension through a dramatic inner storyline. Because once you slow the story, you recover something essential. Not certainty, but space. And space is often the first condition of mental stability. One of the most important skills under uncertainty is the ability to feel instability without turning instability into your whole identity. Most people do not realize how often they lose that distinction. They do not simply feel restless. They become restless in their whole way of seeing. They do not simply feel afraid. They begin thinking, speaking, and interpreting through fear as though fear now deserves to decide what everything means. They do not simply feel unsettled. They begin becoming someone internally unsettled in every direction. That is the turning point. Because uncertainty becomes much more psychologically dangerous the moment a feeling stops being a state you are experiencing and starts becoming the atmosphere that governs your whole mind. At that point, the instability is no longer passing through you. It is organizing you. It is shaping interpretation, mood, behavior, and self-relationship all at once. And when that happens, the mind begins losing form much faster than the situation itself may require. This is why emotional containment matters so much. Containment is not suppression. It is not pretending you are calm when you are not. It is not pushing the feeling down, numbing out, hardening yourself, or acting as if uncertainty does not touch you. Containment is the disciplined ability to let instability be present without letting it become the whole structure of the self. That distinction changes everything. Because many people only know two ways of handling emotional turbulence. They either get swallowed by it or they try to crush it. They either merge with the feeling completely or fight the feeling as if the feeling itself were the enemy. But both responses often create more instability. When you merge with the state, you lose shape. When you attack the state blindly, you usually add tension to tension. Containment offers a stronger third way. It says, "This unease is real, but it is not the whole of me. This fear is real, but it is not the final meaning of reality. This restlessness is here, but it does not get to become my whole identity for the day." That is mental stability in practice. Imagine someone waiting for an answer that matters. The reply has not come. The future remains open. The body tightens. Thoughts begin speeding up. Emotion starts rising in the background. An uncontained mind does not simply notice that activation. It starts becoming the activation. It begins reading everything through it. The silence feels heavier. The delay feels darker. The whole day starts bending around the inner disturbance. But a more stable mind does something different. It notices the instability and refuses to let instability become the whole lens. It says, in effect, something is unsettled in me right now, but I do not need to become made of this unsettled feeling. That is not denial. It is leadership. And leadership matters because uncertainty always tries to create totality. It wants the feeling to seem absolute. It wants restlessness to feel like proof, fear to feel like foresight, and emotional turbulence to sound like truth. Containment interrupts that process. It restores room inside the mind. It allows the person to say, unease is present, but ease is not the only thing missing. Structure can still remain. I may not feel calm, but I do not need to hand the whole day over to this state. That room is one of the deepest forms of inner strength. Because once room exists, other capacities remain available. Observation remains available. Proportion remains available. Deliberateness remains available. Choice remains available. The person may still feel the instability, but he is no longer entirely governed by it. He can still sort, He can still pause. He can still protect interpretation before the feeling becomes a conclusion about life itself. This is why stable minds are not necessarily less emotional. They are often less fusible. That is an important difference. They may still feel uncertainty intensely. They may still feel restless, frustrated, vulnerable, tired of waiting, tired of open loops, tired of not knowing. But they do not let those states take total command. They have a stronger container. They can hold fear without becoming fearful in every dimension. They can hold restlessness without turning the whole day into restless action. They can hold instability without becoming psychologically identical to instability. Think of a container and a spill. When there is no container, the liquid spreads everywhere. It reaches every surface, changes the condition of the whole space, and creates disorder far beyond its original size. But when the container holds, the intensity remains where it belongs. It can still be strong. It can still matter, but it does not invade everything. That is what containment does for the mind. It keeps one emotional state from spreading into your whole identity, your whole day, your whole interpretation of reality. This is especially important because unstable feelings are persuasive. The stronger the feeling, the more truthful it can seem. The longer it lasts, the more final it can sound. The more often it returns, the more deeply it can feel like personality. But intensity is not the same as truth. Duration is not the same as destiny. A state can be real without deserving command. A feeling can be powerful without becoming the final narrator of the moment. That is the practical correction. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling immediately?" ask something stronger. How do I hold this feeling without letting it run my whole mind? That question creates maturity, because immediate relief is not always available, but containment often is. You may not be able to stop the first wave of fear, but you may be able to stop fear from becoming your entire way of seeing. You may not be able to stop uncertainty from agitating your nervous system, but you may be able to keep that agitation from becoming your whole identity. You may not be able to make the unknown disappear, but you may be able to prevent the unknown from turning your mind into a place with no structure. That is the work. Not becoming less human, becoming more internally anchored while being human. And once that skill begins strengthening, uncertainty loses some of its power. Not because the unanswered thing has been answered, but because the instability it creates is no longer allowed to become the whole of you. When life becomes uncertain, the mind often tries to solve the whole experience through thinking. It searches for the answer, the sign, the interpretation, the hidden pattern that will finally make the unknown feel manageable. And because uncertainty is mentally uncomfortable, that search can become relentless. The mind keeps moving, circling, rehearsing, forecasting, checking, reviewing. It tells itself this is necessary, useful, responsible, but often, after a certain point, it is no longer creating clarity. It is creating drift. That is one of the most overlooked dangers of uncertainty. When answers are unavailable, the mind becomes vulnerable to abstraction. It starts living in possibility instead of reality, in anticipation instead of sequence, in projection instead of contact. The person may still be physically present in the room, but mentally he has been pulled into 10 futures, 6 interpretations, and a private argument with the unknown that has no clean ending. He is not only uncertain, he is ungrounded. This is why small acts of order matter so much. Not because they solve uncertainty, because they stop the mind from dissolving into it. A great deal of mental instability under uncertainty comes from the loss of concrete structure. The person begins spending more time in thought than in grounded contact with life. He keeps waiting, checking, imagining, reinterpreting, anticipating. The future grows louder than the room he is actually in. The unresolved thing starts setting the tone for the entire day. That is when order becomes psychologically important, not as productivity theater, as stabilization. A small act of order tells the mind something the unknown cannot tell it. It tells the mind there is still structure here. The answer may not be available. The outcome may not be clear. But not everything is floating. That message matters more than it seems. Because under uncertainty, people often become mentally helpless not only because they do not know, but because the lack of knowing starts infecting everything else. The room becomes messier. The schedule becomes looser. The mind becomes more scattered. One unfinished problem quietly invites 10 smaller forms of disorder, and those smaller disorders make the unknown feel even larger. The person is no longer just living with an open loop. He is living in an environment that keeps reinforcing openness, incompletion, and drift at every level. This is where small acts of order become a form of mental care. Making the bed, answering one real message, cleaning one surface, writing down the actual facts instead of replaying the whole fear, returning to one concrete task, taking a walk without checking for signs, preparing food properly instead of eating in mental distraction, organizing the next hour instead of trying to mentally solve the next 6 months. These things look ordinary. That is exactly why they are powerful. Because uncertainty tries to pull the mind upward into abstraction and outward into endless possibility, order brings it back down into sequence, into embodiment, into reality as it can actually be lived right now. It says, you may not know the future, but you still know how to take the next grounded step. And that step matters because it protects form. This is the important refrain. A small act of order is not trivial just because it is small. Under uncertainty, it can be the difference between a mind that keeps drifting and a mind that regains contact with itself. Imagine someone waiting on an important outcome. Hours pass, nothing is resolved. The mind starts wandering everywhere. By afternoon, he is checking, replaying, imagining, scanning tone, rereading silence, losing patience with ordinary things. At that point, the instinct may be to think harder, but often the wiser move is smaller and more grounded. Put the phone down. Write down what is actually known. Clear the desk. Finish one defined task. Step outside. Re-enter the day through one act of order, instead of through another spiral of interpretation. That does not remove the uncertainty. It interrupts its takeover. And that is often the real goal. Not total peace. Recovered structure. This matters especially for overthinkers and emotionally intelligent people, because they often assume that more reflection will eventually create stability. But when the mind is already overloaded by the unknown, more reflection can become more drift. More analysis can become more distance from life. More checking can become more internal dependency on what cannot yet be controlled. At that point, the mind does not always need more insight. It often needs re-entry into order. That is what small acts of order provide. They restore sequence. First this, then this, then this. They remind the nervous system that not everything is unresolved, not everything is abstract, not everything is suspended. Some things can still be done cleanly. Some things can still be completed. Some parts of life can still hold shape while other parts remain uncertain. That is stabilizing because it prevents the mind from generalizing the unknown into a total life condition. And that generalization is what makes uncertainty so dangerous. When one unresolved thing becomes the atmosphere of everything, the mind starts living as if all ground is gone. But often all ground is not gone. Some ground is gone. Some answers are missing. Some outcomes are open. But there is still a room to care for, a task to do, a body to regulate, a day to live. Small acts of order reconnect you to that truth. They say the future may be unclear, but the next right action is not always unclear. That line is deeply stabilizing because it moves the mind away from helplessness and back toward relationship with reality. Not imagined reality, lived reality. This is also why order is not only outer. It can be internal. writing the facts plainly, separating what is known from what is feared, numbing the state instead of becoming the state, choosing one rule for the day instead of mentally negotiating the whole future. These two are acts of order. They reduce noise. They give the mind edges again. They keep uncertainty from turning into total mental fog. So the principle becomes simple. When the mind begins drifting under uncertainty, do not ask only for answers. Create order, not dramatic order, not perfection. Enough order to remind yourself that while the future may still be open, the self does not have to become completely unstructured with it. That is how grounded behavior becomes a form of mental stability. Not because order controls the unknown, but because order keeps the unknown from controlling everything else. The first hours of uncertainty are often not the most important because the facts are clearest. They are important because the mind is least protected there. Something happens or fails to happen, an answer does not come, a situation changes tone, a conversation ends without resolution, a decision remains open, a signal feels incomplete, and before reality has fully revealed anything, the inner system begins accelerating. Thought moves faster, emotion rises earlier, interpretation reaches further than evidence deserves. The person is no longer only standing in uncertainty. He is standing in uncertainty, while his mind is rapidly deciding what uncertainty must mean. That is why the opening phase is so dangerous. Not because the unknown is already at its worst, but because the mind is most vulnerable to turning the unknown into a full internal event before the unknown has actually become anything final. In those early hours, the system often wants one thing above all else: closure. It wants the discomfort ended. It wants an answer, a sign, a conclusion, some solid meaning to stop the feeling of suspension. And because closure is missing, the mind starts trying to manufacture its own version of it. It builds a story. It darkens the silence. It treats delay as evidence. It turns possibility into prediction. What is still unresolved begins getting emotionally lived, as though it has already resolved in the worst way. This is where many people lose far more stability than the situation itself initially required. The uncertain thing may still be small, temporary, or not yet fully formed. But the mind, if unguarded, makes it total very quickly. That is why the first hours matter so much. They are the period when uncertainty is most likely to become amplified, dramatized, and internally multiplied. A person gets a vague message from someone important, or no message at all. A result does not come when expected. A plan shifts without explanation. An ambiguity enters a relationship, a career, a financial decision, a health concern, a future that already matters deeply. In the first hour, nothing final may actually be known, but inwardly an enormous amount can begin happening. The body tightens, the mind scans, possibilities multiply, ordinary tasks become harder to stay with. A private atmosphere of danger starts forming, and if that atmosphere is not interrupted early, the rest of the day may become recovery from the mind's reaction rather than response to the actual situation. So the first principle here is simple. Do not let the first wave become the whole reality. That line matters because the first wave usually feels authoritative. It feels like insight. It feels like your instincts telling you what this must mean. But the first wave of uncertainty is often shaped as much by the nervous system's intolerance for open space as by the facts of the situation itself. In other words, what feels like clarity may actually be activation. That is why the first hours need protection. Not perfect calm. Protection. The mind must be prevented from racing too far, too fast, too emotionally deep into a reality that has not yet fully declared itself. This begins by slowing interpretation. What actually happened? What do I know? What am I assuming? What part is fact? And what part is my mind trying to escape the discomfort of not knowing? Those questions do not instantly soothe the body. They do something more important. They restore sequence. They keep the mind from converting ambiguity into certainty before certainty exists. Then comes another essential move: reduce escalation. Do not add extra inputs. Do not keep checking the same signal. Every few minutes hopping repetition will produce clarity. Do not immediately rehearse every possible future. Do not emotionally live the next 3 months in the first 3 hours. Do not start talking to yourself as though the worst version has already been confirmed. These moves matter because uncertainty feeds on momentum. The more mental speed you give it early, the harder it becomes to recover proportion later. A stable mind understands this. It knows that the opening phase is not the time to surrender completely to instinctive interpretation. It is the time to keep the structure simple enough that uncertainty does not instantly become identity, mood, and worldview all at once. This is where grounded behavior becomes especially important. Not as denial, as containment. Drink water. Go outside for 10 minutes. Write down only what is known. Complete one clean task. Put the phone down for a defined period instead of using it as a ritual object for reassurance. Keep one part of the day orderly so the whole day does not get swallowed by one open loop. These things do not answer the uncertainty. They stop uncertainty from taking over the entire internal field. That is the real goal in the first hours. Not immediate peace. Early containment. Imagine someone waiting for a reply that matters deeply. In the first hour, the fragile mind says, "This silence means something. I can feel it. I need to keep checking. I need to solve this internally before I can function." The steadier mind may still feel the pull, but it responds differently. It says, "This is unsettling, but I do not need to let unsettlement run the whole day. I can let this remain open without becoming fully open and unstable with it. I can hold form while more information is still absent." That is a very different relationship to uncertainty. And it is exactly what the first hours require. Because those early hours are when the mind is deciding whether the unknown will remain one part of life or become the emotional atmosphere of all of life. A poorly handled first phase makes everything heavier. A better handled first phase does not remove discomfort, but it prevents discomfort from expanding faster than reality. There is another part of this that matters deeply. Do not make the first reaction a second problem. Many people feel the initial destabilization and then become ashamed that they were destabilized. Now there is the uncertainty itself, and there is judgment about being affected by it. That doubles the load. A more mature standard sounds like this: I do not need to be perfectly calm in the first hours. I need to stay structured enough that uncertainty does not immediately take over my whole mind. That is a stronger and more humane rule. It allows for humanity without collapse. It allows for activation without surrender. It allows for discomfort without total internal disorganization. So when uncertainty first enters, remember what is actually at stake. The first hours are dangerous because the mind is tempted to make the unknown emotionally larger than it is before life has given permission for that enlargement. Your job is not to become superhuman in those hours. Your job is to keep enough form that the unknown remains unknown, instead of becoming a self-created mental emergency. Because if you can protect the first hours, even imperfectly, you often prevent the rest of the day from being ruled by a story that uncertainty had not yet earned the right to tell. Short uncertainty is difficult. Long uncertainty is different. A brief period of not knowing can agitate the mind, but a prolonged season of not knowing begins reshaping the way the mind lives. It is no longer just a moment of discomfort. It becomes an atmosphere, a background condition, a mental climate that starts influencing everything else if there is not enough structure inside the person to contain it. That is why prolonged uncertainty is such a serious test. Not because it always arrives dramatically, because it stays. And what stays begins teaching the mind how to organize itself. Many people can gather themselves for a short stretch. They can manage one anxious afternoon, one difficult conversation, one delayed answer, one unstable week. But when uncertainty keeps extending beyond their preferred timeline, a different challenge begins. Emotional force is no longer enough. Reassurance wears off faster. Perspective becomes harder to maintain through repetition. The person is not only carrying one unresolved thing, he is carrying the ongoing pressure of not being able to close the loop. Day after day, the mind remains slightly open, slightly leaning forward, slightly unfinished. This is where structure matters more than emotion. Because emotion does not remain reliable over long periods of unresolvedness. At first, uncertainty may feel sharp, dramatic, and easy to identify. Later, it becomes subtler and often more dangerous. It begins thinning patience, weakening concentration, shortening emotional margin, making ordinary life feel harder to inhabit. The person is no longer panicking all the time perhaps, but he may be living in a quieter form of internal erosion. He becomes mentally tired faster, more reactive than usual, less able to tolerate delay, ambiguity, or friction in other parts of life. The unknown has not only stayed unresolved, it has started leaking into everything. That is why prolonged uncertainty is not survived mainly through emotional intensity. It is survived through preserved structure. A person in a long season of uncertainty has to stop asking only, "How do I feel about this today?" and begin asking, "What am I protecting in myself while this remains unresolved?" That question is much stronger. It shifts attention away from daily emotional weather and toward the architecture of inner life. Because the truth is, feelings will move. Some days will be heavier, some days lighter. Some days the unknown will feel closer, darker, more intrusive. If your whole stability depends on feeling steady every day, then prolonged uncertainty will keep taking more from you than it should. Structure prevents that. Structure means hierarchy. It means not everything gets equal emotional weight every day. It means not every possibility gets full mental rehearsal. It means not every unresolved detail is allowed to spread into the entire day. It means your sleep, your work, your body, your relationships, your small routines, your interpretive discipline, and your contact with ordinary life are not all surrendered just because one important thing remains open. This is one of the great mistakes people make during long uncertainty. They let the unresolved thing become the atmosphere of everything. The future is unclear, so the whole day becomes unclear. The answer is missing, so the whole self becomes psychologically unfinished. One open loop turns into a general inner condition of drift. That is not only an emotional response, it is a structural failure. And the correction is not glamorous, it is very grounded. Protect rhythm. Protect sleep where you can. Protect small routines that remind the mind what order feels like. Protect the difference between what is real and what is being mentally rehearsed. Protect the parts of life that are still livable even while one part remains unresolved. Protect the ability to keep one day from becoming emotionally identical to the whole season. These protections matter because long uncertainty quietly compresses the mind if it is left unchecked. The person starts living in the future too much, starts checking too often, starts mentally reopening the same question all day long, starts losing contact with the simple fact that while one part of life is unresolved, many parts of life still require presence, order, and care. Structure is what keeps the unresolved part from colonizing the whole internal world. Imagine someone living through a prolonged, uncertain season. It may be about work, health, money, a relationship, family, immigration, housing, reputation, or a future path that has gone quiet. At first, the mind reacts strongly. Then the days continue. The answers do not come. The person keeps functioning, but something starts thinning inside. He becomes less patient, more distracted, more likely to interpret neutral things through the lens of strain, more dependent on little signals of reassurance, more mentally tired by ordinary tasks. In that phase, the real threat is no longer only the uncertainty itself. The threat is that prolonged uncertainty may slowly become the organizing force of the person's inner life. That is why structure has to be stronger than mood here. Because mood will not carry you through a long, unresolved season. Some days you will feel tired of being strong. Some days you will want relief immediately. Some days you will want to overthink, just to feel temporarily closer to closure. Some days you will become more emotionally suggestible, more likely to believe darker stories, more likely to hand the whole day over to one unresolved question. This is exactly when structure proves its worth. Structure says, even if the answer is absent, I do not disappear from my life. Even if clarity is delayed, I do not let the delay define every hour. Even if uncertainty remains, I still keep form. That is mental stability at a deeper level. Not the ability to make uncertainty end. The ability to keep uncertainty from becoming your whole psychological identity while it lasts. This also means letting go of a fantasy that quietly harms many people. The fantasy of functioning at your peak while carrying unresolved weight for too long. Prolonged uncertainty may reduce your margin. It may change how much emotional energy you have available. It may make you more careful with your attention. A stable mind accepts that reality without collapsing into helplessness. It does not keep saying, "Why can't I feel completely normal while carrying something abnormal for this long?" It says something wiser. This season is demanding, so I must become more deliberate about what I protect. That is maturity. Not pretending the season is not affecting you. Refusing to let the season erase your structure completely. And perhaps that is the deepest point of this section. Prolonged uncertainty tests structure more than emotion, because emotion will always fluctuate under unresolved conditions. What determines whether the mind remains stable is not whether it feels good consistently. It is whether it keeps enough order, hierarchy, packing, and self-command that the unknown does not slowly take over the whole inner landscape. So if you are living in a long stretch of not knowing, stop measuring your strength only by how calm you feel today. Ask something better. What structure am I keeping alive while this remains unresolved? Because that is often the difference between a person who becomes quietly consumed by uncertainty and a person who, though still affected, remains inwardly inhabitable while life refuses to become clear. One of the most important things you can learn in an uncertain season is how to recover before the season starts defining who you are. Because uncertainty does not only unsettle the moment. If you are not careful, it begins rewriting identity. That is where the deeper damage happens. Not simply when you overthink one night, lose perspective one afternoon, check too many times, emotionally spiral, become mentally restless, or let the unknown take over more of the day than it should. Those moments matter, yes, but what often shapes the future most is what your mind concludes about you after those moments. If it decides that your reaction is not just a pattern but a definition, then uncertainty gains a second power. It no longer only disturbs you while it is happening. It starts teaching your mind what kind of person you supposedly are whenever life becomes unclear. That is a dangerous lesson. Because once the mind begins saying, "I always lose myself when things are unresolved," or "I am just not stable in uncertainty," or "not knowing always destroys me," the uncertain season stops being only an experience. It becomes an identity story, and identity stories have weight. They affect the next unknown before the next unknown even arrives. They make the mind expect collapse earlier, distrust itself faster, and give more authority to fear because fear now feels consistent with who the person believes he is. This is why recovery matters so much. Not only emotional recovery, identity recovery, the ability to experience destabilization without letting destabilization become self-definition. That distinction is vital because no one moves through prolonged uncertainty perfectly. There will be days where the mind drifts farther than it should, days when the open loop gets too much emotional volume, days when you become tired of carrying the unfinishedness and you start scanning, projecting, rehearsing, or mentally surrendering more than you wanted to. Those days do not mean nothing has changed. They do not mean all your inner work was fake. They do not mean uncertainty has exposed some final truth that you are weak beyond repair. They mean you are human under strain. And that reality has to be handled intelligently. A weaker recovery sounds like this. Here we go again. I knew I couldn't handle this. This proves I am unstable. This is what I am really like when life gets unclear. A stronger recovery sounds very different. It says, I lost form there. I gave that unknown too much authority. I let that fear become a larger story than it deserved. I became more mentally governed by unresolvedness than I want to be. That needs correction, but it is not the whole truth of me. That difference is not cosmetic. It is structural. Specificity protects dignity. Shame destroys it. Specificity says, here is the pattern. Shame says, here is your identity. And if you want to stay mentally stable in uncertain life, you must become very careful about which voice you allow to narrate your difficult moments. Because uncertainty already creates enough pressure without you turning every unstable response into a verdict on your character. This is why one of the first tasks in recovery is to separate the state from the self. The state may have been restless, fearful, compulsive, emotionally overactive, or mentally scattered. That does not mean the whole self is permanently those things. The state may have taken over for a while. That does not mean it deserves ownership of your identity. The person who says, I was overtaken by uncertainty today, is standing in a very different place from the person who says, uncertainty exposes who I really am. One leaves room for training. The other turns the whole event into a prison. So what does mature recovery actually look like? It begins with honest numbing. Not dramatic numbing. Not vague numbing. Honest numbing. What happened? Where did I lose form? What was the trigger? What story did my mind start running? What did I start treating as certain too quickly? Where did I stop living in the present and begin living in imagined futures? Those questions matter because they transform uncertainty from a fog into a pattern, and patterns can be worked with. Identity verdicts cannot. Then comes another crucial step. Return to structure quickly. Not perfectly. Quickly. Because the longer the mind remains in self-story after destabilization, the more expensive the destabilization becomes. A difficult hour becomes a difficult day. A difficult day becomes a narrative about the season. The narrative about the season becomes a belief about the self. That is how instability deepens. Not because the first disturbance was fatal, but because no clean return interrupted it early enough. This is why re-entry matters. Come back to one act of order, one factual sentence, one grounded routine, one small behavior that reminds the mind it is not only a place where uncertainty spreads, but also a place where structure can return. That may mean writing down what is actually known. It may mean cleaning one space. It may mean stepping away from the checking behavior. It may mean completing one real task before your mind turns the whole day into a waiting room. It may mean sleeping instead of mentally negotiating through the night. It may mean speaking to yourself in more exact language. Whatever form it takes, the principle stays the same. Do not let the destabilized moment continue teaching the mind after the moment has already ended. because uncertainty is always teaching. It is teaching the mind whether not knowing means danger, whether open loops mean collapse, whether unresolvedness means internal surrender, whether restlessness deserves command, whether the self disappears when clarity is absent. And recovery determines which lesson gets reinforced. If you recover slowly, dramatically, and with identity shame, the mind learns fragility. If you recover honestly, specifically, and with a return to structure, the mind learns that instability may visit, but it does not get to become your identity. That is a profoundly different future. Imagine someone in a long, uncertain season around work, health, money, or relationship ambiguity. One evening, he loses more of himself to the unknown than he wanted to. He checks too much, thinks too much, becomes more emotionally governed by the unresolved thing. A fragile recovery says, "This season is destroying me." A stronger recovery says, "This season is testing me, and tonight I lost some form. That matters. It needs correction. But I will not let one destabilized night become the full meaning of who I am in uncertainty." The outer facts may be identical. The inner future being trained is not. That is why this section matters so much. Because people often think stability means never becoming destabilized. It does not. Often stability means becoming better at refusing to let destabilization harden into identity. It means learning how to come back before the mind converts one hard moment into a permanent self-concept. It means remembering that the mind under strain is not always a truthful biographer. It means protecting the self from being rewritten by a temporary state. So if uncertainty has already made you lose form, do not add a second wound by making that loss of form the whole truth about you. Take it seriously. Name it clearly. Learn from it honestly. Return to structure deliberately. But do not worship it as identity, because the unknown does enough damage on its own. It does not need your help becoming who you think you are. Most people begin trying to become mentally stable because they want to handle life better. They want to stop overreacting, stop spiraling, stop becoming so emotionally governable when things stay unresolved. They want to think more clearly, suffer less internally, and stop feeling as if uncertainty keeps taking too much from them. That is a real and worthy reason to begin. But if you stay with this work long enough, something deeper starts happening. You do not only change how you handle uncertainty, you change how it feels to be you while uncertainty is happening. That shift is easy to underestimate because it is quieter than visible success. It does not always arrive with one dramatic breakthrough. Often it appears in small, private ways. A difficult unknown enters your life, and your mind does not become a full internal emergency as quickly as it once did. An answer is delayed, and you still feel the pull, but you do not lose the whole day to it. A future remains unresolved, and though you are affected, you do not feel mentally homeless inside the waiting. Something has changed in the atmosphere of the self. That matters more than many people realize. Because one of the hardest parts of an unstable mind is not only what happens during the uncertain moment. It is what life inside that mind begins to feel like over time. A person who repeatedly loses inner footing under uncertainty does not only suffer from the outside unknown, he starts suffering from his relationship to his own mind. He becomes wary of how quickly his thoughts darken. He anticipates his own restlessness. He braces against his own interpretive habits. He knows how easily one open loop can spread into the whole day, and so part of him is never fully at ease even before the next uncertain season arrives. He is not only carrying life's instability, he is carrying the fear that his own inner world may become unstable in response to it. That is exhausting in a very particular way. It makes the self feel less like a place to live and more like a place to manage. That is one of the hidden rewards of real mental stability. It does not only improve performance, it makes your inner life more inhabitable. That word matters Inhabitable, because many people are living inside minds that feel too crowded, too reactive, too easy to disturb. One unanswered question spreads everywhere. One unresolved issue changes the emotional tone of the whole day. One uncertain future keeps the nervous system slightly clenched from morning to night. Even when they are outwardly functioning, inwardly they do not feel settled enough to fully live where they are. Their mind is always leaning toward what is missing, what is unclear, what has not been resolved yet. Mental stability begins changing that. Not by making you indifferent, not by making life always clear, by making you less internally easy to overrun. That is a profound shift, because once the mind becomes more stable, uncertainty does not stop existing, but it stops immediately becoming the emotional center of everything. It may still matter, it may still hurt, it may still pull at you, but it is no longer granted total authority over the whole internal field. There is more room before panic, more room before story, more room before identity starts absorbing the instability of the moment. The self becomes a place where life can remain unfinished without instantly becoming mentally unlivable. That creates a new kind of relief, not the relief of always having answers, the relief of no longer needing answers in order to remain with yourself. That may be one of the deepest changes of all, because many people are not only tired of uncertainty, they are tired of what uncertainty keeps doing to the inside of them, tired of becoming mentally restless too fast, tired of letting open loops take over their concentration, tired of feeling present in body but absent in mind, tired of watching their emotional weather become dictated by what is unresolved, tired of living in a nervous system that keeps treating not knowing as if not knowing were a total threat. A more stable mind begins softening that condition. You still feel uncertainty, but you stop becoming made of it so quickly. You still want answers, but you stop postponing your whole inner order until those answers arrive. You still have hard days, but those hard days stop carrying quite the same power to convince you that your whole mental world is fragile. That changes daily life in quiet but powerful ways. You think with more space. You feel with more containment. You return to the present more easily after being mentally pulled into the future. You become less dependent on reassurance in order to feel psychologically usable. That last point matters. Many unstable minds are not only anxious, they are conditional. They need a sign, an answer, a confirmation, a resolution, or at least an emotionally satisfying interpretation before they can regain access to their better structure. Stability changes that by making the self more available under unresolved conditions. You begin realizing that you do not need perfect clarity in order to remain a place with order. You do not need final answers before you can think, act, rest, and relate from something deeper than your fear. That is a form of inner freedom, and it changes the whole feel of existence. More stable mind also changes how you experience emotion itself. You stop fearing every surge of unease as if it were the beginning of complete mental takeover. You stop treating restlessness as prophecy. You stop assuming that because your body feels activated, your whole reality must now be dark. You become more capable of saying, something unstable is moving through me right now, but I do not need to become internally unstable in every direction because of it. That ability is deeply relieving. It allows you to remain human without becoming so governable by your humanity. And over time, a subtler change occurs. You stop relating to yourself mainly as a problem to solve. You start relating to yourself as a place where structure can exist. That is deeply healing, because many people who struggle with uncertainty carry a constant low-grade disappointment in themselves. They may not say it out loud. They may still look capable to others, but inwardly, they feel too easy to disturb, too easy to pull off center, too dependent on things settling outside them before they can settle inside themselves. That feeling quietly weakens self-respect, because it is hard to deeply trust a mind that feels so externally governable. Stability begins repairing that, not through fantasy, through evidence. Each time you slow the story instead of racing into it, something in you becomes more livable. Each time you feel the instability without becoming made of it, something in you becomes more livable. Each time you return to small acts of order, instead of letting the unknown colonize the whole day, something in you becomes more livable. Each time you recover from mental drift without turning that drift into identity, something in you becomes more livable. The mind starts learning that uncertainty does not automatically mean self-loss. And once that learning deepens, the self begins feeling different from the inside. Less crowded, less alarming, less dependent on fast closure, more breathable, more ordered, more trustworthy. That is why real stability often feels calmer than people expect. It is not usually loud. It does not need to prove itself. It often shows up as a quieter inner life, less emotional noise around open questions, less urgency around delayed answers, less interpretive drama around unresolved things. The person still cares, still feels, still notices, still hopes, but he no longer turns every uncertainty into a private psychological storm by reflex. That changes self-respect too, because it is difficult to deeply respect a self you do not trust under unresolved conditions. But when the mind becomes more stable, self-respect becomes less theoretical. You no longer admire steadiness only as an abstract ideal. You begin experiencing yourself as someone who can remain more intact while life is still unclear. That does not make you perfect. It makes you believable to yourself. And being believable to yourself is one of the quietest forms of peace a person can build. So when we talk about mental stability, we are talking about more than handling uncertainty better. We are talking about changing the climate of inner life itself. We are talking about what happens when the mind stops being such an easy amplifier of the unknown. We are talking about what happens when not knowing no longer automatically means losing yourself. We are talking about what happens when the self begins feeling less like an unstable waiting room and more like a structure you can actually live inside while life is still becoming clear. That is why this matters so much. A stable mind does not only help you survive the unknown, it changes the quality of your existence within yourself while the unknown remains. And for many people, that is not merely useful. It is healing. Most people think confidence comes from having answers, from knowing what is going to happen, from having a clear plan, a secure outcome, a stable direction, and enough external certainty to let the self feel solid again. That kind of confidence does exist, but it is limited. It is confidence borrowed from conditions. And any confidence borrowed entirely from conditions will disappear the moment conditions become unclear again. That is why so many people feel strong one week and inwardly fragile the next. Nothing deep has changed in who they are. What changed is how much certainty life is currently giving them to stand on. When life is clear, they feel persuasive to themselves. When life becomes open, delayed, or unresolved, that persuasion weakens. They begin doubting not only the future, but their own ability to remain psychologically usable while the future is still unclear. That is not real confidence. That is certainty dependence, wearing the language of confidence. Real confidence deepens somewhere quieter than that. It deepens when the mind stops panicking at the unknown. That is a very different source of strength. Because beneath a lot of low confidence is not a lack of intelligence, worth, or potential. Beneath it is damaged inner trust. A person has seen his own mind become too alarmed by not knowing too many times. He has watched unanswered questions take over the day. He has watched delay become drama, possibility become fear-shaped certainty, and unresolvedness become internal instability. So even when he speaks hopefully on the surface, another part of him remains unconvinced. It remembers how quickly the system can lose form when clarity disappears. That memory matters, because confidence is not only about what you think of yourself when life is easy. It is about what you believe your mind will do when life stops cooperating. Will I stay with myself? Will I lose proportion? Will I let the unknown take over my whole mood? Will I mentally surrender just because I cannot see the answer yet? These questions often sit underneath low confidence without being spoken directly. A person may call it overthinking, anxiety, stress, or being emotionally tired. But often what is really happening is this: he does not fully trust his mind in unresolved conditions. And when a mind does not trust itself under uncertainty, confidence becomes shallow. It becomes something the person can perform in clear moments but not inhabit deeply in unclear ones. This is why stability and confidence are so closely linked. Confidence deepens when the mind proves, through repeated evidence, that uncertainty does not automatically make it panic, distort, collapse, or abandon structure. That kind of confidence is not flashy. It is not built through hype. It is not the result of telling yourself that everything will work out exactly the way you want. It grows from something more honest than that. It grows from experience, from seeing that the answer can be late and you still remain informed, from seeing that open loops can exist without taking over your whole mind, from seeing that a difficult unknown can hurt you without fully governing you, from seeing that your internal world can remain more stable than your external world for a while. That is real confidence. Not confidence that says, I know what will happen. Confidence that says, even if I do not know what will happen, I am becoming someone who can remain mentally steady while life is still unfolding. That is a stronger kind of trust, because it does not depend on immediate closure. It does not require a perfect emotional state. It does not collapse every time the timeline stretches longer than your nervous system prefers. It rests on a different kind of evidence. Evidence that the mind can feel the pull of uncertainty without instantly becoming ruled by it. Evidence that fear can rise without becoming the whole narrator. Evidence that the self does not disappear just because answers have not arrived yet. This is what many people are actually longing for when they say they want more confidence. They do not only want to feel bold. They want to stop feeling so easy to disturb from the inside. They want to stop needing constant reassurance in order to access their better self. They want to know that when life becomes unclear, they will not automatically become unclear in every direction with it. That is what a deeper confidence gives them. A quieter one. A less theatrical one. Not confidence as performance. Confidence as internal trust under unresolved conditions. And that trust changes daily life more than most people expect. You begin waiting differently. You begin deciding differently. You begin facing open futures differently. Not because uncertainty stops affecting you, but because uncertainty stops sounding like total danger inside your own mind. You no longer need every unknown to be resolved before you can breathe, think, act, and remain present. That changes posture. It changes tone. It changes the emotional climate of selfhood. A person with this kind of confidence may still dislike uncertainty deeply. He may still want answers, stability, closure, movement, clarity. But he is no longer internally begging for them in the same way. He is no longer psychologically collapsing while waiting for them. Somewhere inside, a stronger rule has been built. I do not need the future to become clear before I become trustworthy to myself. That is a beautiful and serious kind of confidence, because it means your self-trust is no longer entirely rented from external outcomes. It is increasingly owned from within. And once that begins happening, many smaller shifts follow. You stop overvaluing every signal. You stop darkening every silence. You stop treating every delay like a verdict. You stop over-identifying with the emotional weather of open situations. You stop giving every unknown the right to decide what kind of day, week, or self you are allowed to be. That is not indifference. It is maturity. It is the mind no longer panicking at the absence of immediate answers. And that is exactly why confidence deepens here. Not because uncertainty becomes easier to control. Because your relationship to uncertainty becomes less fragile. You no longer need the unknown to disappear before your better structure appears. You no longer need relief to come first before self-command becomes possible. You no longer need clarity as the price of steadiness. This is why true confidence often grows in seasons people would never choose. Not because those seasons are pleasant, but because they reveal whether the mind can remain more intact without guarantees. They expose whether your self-trust is real or merely conditional. And each time you remain even slightly steadier than before, something inside you learns a new lesson. I do not have to know in order to stay with myself. That lesson is powerful because it weakens one of the deepest roots of fragility. The belief that the unknown automatically makes you unsafe inside your own mind. Once that belief weakens, confidence begins becoming more durable. You still feel uncertainty. You still experience tension. You still care. But you stop interpreting not knowing as the end of your psychological footing. And that changes your whole relationship with the future. The future can stay open. And you can still stay you. That is a form of confidence worth building. Not loud confidence. Not answer-based confidence. Not confidence that depends on life becoming neat before you feel strong. But the kind that grows when the mind stops panicking at the unknown and starts proving, quietly and repeatedly, that it can remain a place with form even while life is still unfinished. At the end of all this, the standard becomes very simple. Not easy, but simple. Hold your form before life gives you answers. That is the new rule. Not because uncertainty will disappear. Not because the future will suddenly become cooperative, readable, and emotionally convenient. Not because waiting will stop hurting, delays will stop agitating you, or unanswered questions will lose all power to disturb the nervous system. Life will still leave things open. Some conversations will still remain unfinished. Some outcomes will still take longer than you hoped. Some seasons will still ask you to live without closure for longer than your mind prefers. What changes is not that uncertainty stops existing. What changes is what uncertainty is allowed to do inside you. For a long time, many people live by a different inner rule without ever naming it. The rule sounds like this: I will steady myself once I know. I will relax once the answer comes. I will return to myself once life stops being unclear. Until then, my mind is allowed to race, my emotions are allowed to take command, and my whole inner world is allowed to remain suspended. That rule feels understandable. It also keeps people fragile. Because if your form depends on answers arriving first, then every unresolved period becomes a psychological threat. The future stays open, and the self opens with it. The situation remains unfinished, and the mind begins living as unfinished in every direction. You are no longer only waiting for clarity. You are postponing your own steadiness until life finally gives permission for it. That is the pattern that must change. Because life will not always give you answers on the timeline your nervous system wants. Some things will stay unclear while you still have to work, speak, rest, decide, love, parent, endure, and remain in relationship with yourself. If your mind cannot hold form until clarity comes, then uncertainty will keep owning too much of your life. So the standard becomes stronger and more mature. I do not wait for answers before I remain informed. That sentence changes the architecture of inner life. It does not deny difficulty. It does not pretend not knowing is easy. It does not ask you to become numb, detached, or emotionally artificial. It asks for something more serious than that. It asks you to stop making certainty the condition for self-command. That is the shift. Hold your form before life gives you answers. Hold interpretation long enough that fear does not become the whole story. Hold emotional containment long enough that restlessness does not become your identity. Hold behavior long enough that one unresolved thing does not colonize the whole day. Hold perspective long enough that delay does not become doom. Hold posture long enough that the absence of closure does not become the absence of structure. This is not perfection. It is steadiness. And steadiness matters because uncertainty has a particular way of pulling people inwardly apart. It invites storing. It invites scanning. It invites emotional dependency on signs, updates, tones, shifts, and imagined futures. Without a stronger rule inside you, the mind begins obeying all of it. Every possibility gets too much authority. Every silence gets too much meaning. Every open loop starts behaving like a private emergency. Holding form interrupts that process. It says, the answer may be absent, but I do not become absent from myself. Clarity may be delayed, but my inner order does not need to be delayed with it. Relief may not be here yet, but I do not surrender my structure until relief arrives. That is a profound kind of strength. Because one of the hardest things for a human mind to do is remain internally trustworthy while something important is still unresolved. The mind wants movement. It wants conclusion. It wants emotional closure even if factual closure is unavailable. To resist that pull without becoming cold is real maturity. To remain human, affected, and still structured is real stability. This is why the final standard matters more than any temporary mood. Moods move. Answers come and go. Conditions change. Some days you will feel stronger, some days more vulnerable. Some days uncertainty will feel lighter, some days much heavier. If your entire inner life keeps changing shape with those fluctuations, then you will remain too vulnerable to life's unfinished chapters. But if a deeper rule has been built, then even while your emotions move, something more settled remains underneath them. That settled thing is form. And form is what protects dignity. Not the dignity of looking impressive. The dignity of not letting the unresolved world completely dictate the unresolvedness of your mind. That is why this standard is so useful in real life. When a message does not come, hold form. When a decision remains delayed, hold form. When the future stays open, hold form. When your mind starts leaning too hard into imagined answers, hold form. When discomfort begins arguing that you cannot settle until life settles, hold form. Not rigidly, not performatively, honestly, calmly, firmly. It may mean slowing the story before it becomes prophecy. It may mean feeling the instability without becoming made of it. It may mean returning to one grounded act of order when the mind starts drifting too far into possibility. It may mean not checking again for the 10th time. It may mean letting a question remain unanswered for one more hour without turning that hour into a psychological collapse. It may mean recovering quickly after a day when uncertainty took too much from you. The expression changes. The principle stays the same. Do not wait for answers before you offer stability to yourself. This is where the deepest transformation in the whole script quietly resolves. At the beginning, uncertainty felt like something that entered life from the outside and then quickly took over the inside. The mind became crowded, restless, over-alert, over-interpreting, too easy to disturb. But now the listener is being handed a different posture. Not make life certain. Not control every future. Not find perfect relief. Something more realistic and more powerful than that. Become someone who can remain informed while the future is still unfinished. That is not a small standard. It changes how you wait. It changes how you interpret. It changes how you carry unanswered things. It changes how much authority you give to delay, silence, open loops, and imagined futures. It changes how safe your mind feels to live inside, while life is still becoming clear. And maybe that is the deepest reward of all. Not that the unknown disappears, but that you stop disappearing into the unknown every time it stays longer than you wanted. That is what this final standard protects. It protects your relationship with yourself before life gives you closure. It protects your mind from becoming a hostage to unfinished things. It protects the difference between external uncertainty and internal surrender. So let this be the rule you carry forward. Not "I will be okay when I know." Not "I can only settle once this ends." Not "I must feel relief before I can return to myself." Something stronger, something calmer, something more usable than all of that. Hold your form before life gives you answers. Hold it when the future is open. Hold it when the story wants to run ahead of reality. Hold it when discomfort tells you that relief must come first. Hold it when the day feels mentally unfinished. Hold it when your mind wants to become governed by possibility. Hold it imperfectly if you must. Hold it quietly if you must. Hold it with a tired nervous system if you must. But hold it, because every time you do, you teach your mind the same life-changing truth. I do not need certainty before I can stay in relationship with myself. That truth is not loud. It is not dramatic. It does not look like constant confidence or emotional invulnerability. It looks like something more mature than that. It looks like a person who still feels the pull of the unknown, but no longer lets that pull decide everything. It looks like someone who can live in unanswered time, without making unanswered time the definition of who he is. It looks like a mind that no longer treats uncertainty as the automatic end of inner order. That is real mental stability. Not certainty, not control, not a future that finally behaves. A self that has learned how to keep its shape before life explains itself. And that is enough to change a life from the inside out.